Why was everyone suddenly quiet when she entered the room? The air in the Tactical Operations Center shifted, not because of rank, not even because of fear, but because no one knew who the hell she was. Dust still floated in lazy spirals from the door as Petty Officer First Class Thea Cater stepped inside, her presence almost too still for the noise of a war zone. The dull light flickered across the concrete walls, and the faint hum of generators filled the silence left in her wake. Afghanistan's winter had teeth that morning. It bit through her combat shirt as she set her rifle case gently on the briefing table. No insignia beyond what was required, no name patch that anyone recognized. Just the subdued American flag on her shoulder and the small trident stitched in black thread, the mark that meant she'd survived the impossible. Lieutenant Commander Brooks barely glanced up from his tablet. "Take a seat, Ghost 4, he said, voice clipped professional. She nodded once. No reaction, no eye contact with the rest of the team. She'd learned long ago that silence drew less fire than confidence. Around the table sat men whose names carried weight: Rangers, Green Berets, SEAL operators with decades of experience and reputations that echoed through every base from Bagram to Cornwall Valley. The kind of men whose stories filled mess hall whispers and recruitment posters. She was not one of those stories, not yet. Thea took a seat near the edge of the room, keeping her eyes forward. Her gloved hands rested on her lap, perfectly still, while the others traded quiet looks. "Who is she?" The unspoken question burned in the air. "All right," Brooks said, standing. "We've failed to get Manser 4 times. We're not failing a fifth." The holographic map flickered to life across the table. Thea watched as lines of red and blue spread through the digital terrain: valley routes, approach points, the rough shape of an enemy compound nestled like a scar in the mountain pass. "Manser's counter-sniper element has cost us good men," Brooks continued. 2 Afghan scouts, 3 American operators wounded. They've got overwatch on every entry route. A low curse slipped from someone's mouth. Thea glanced toward the map again, noting wind directions, elevation marks, the sun's angle at dawn. Her mind worked silently, calculating numbers no one else had mentioned yet. Distance, wind drift, Coriolis effect. She wasn't looking at the enemy. She was already reading the mountain itself. But that detail, the quiet one, didn't escape Chief Petty Officer Martinez. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying her. "Sir," he said to Brooks, "I've got a question about our Overwatch assignment." Brooks exhaled slowly. "Go ahead." Martinez's eyes didn't leave Thea. "We're trusting sniper support to someone none of us have ever operated with before. No record, no reputation. She just shows up on our roster out of nowhere." The words weren't cruel, just blunt, but they still sliced through the room like a clean shot. "Someone vouch for her?" Davis asked from across the table, half a smirk on his face. "Because I checked, and there's no confirmed record of a petty officer cader in any SEAL element prior to this rotation." Brooks's jaw tightened. Her performance records classified. Command assigned her for a reason. Davis raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, sure. Maybe we're checking boxes now. Diversity initiative, maybe." Thea didn't move, didn't blink. The comments rolled off her like rain on armor. She'd heard worse before, sometimes in training, sometimes in the silence between shots. "Enough," Brooks said firmly. "You'll get your answers in the field." But the damage was done. Thea could feel it, the doubt, thick and heavy, hanging in the air. When the briefing ended, she lingered in the back, quietly packing her gear. No one spoke to her directly. Even Williams, the junior sniper assigned as her spotter, offered only a brief nod before leaving. She didn't take it personally. Trust wasn't earned in words here. It was measured in how steady your hand was when it mattered most. Outside, the Afghan cold cut deeper as the sun sank behind the Hindu Kush. Thea made her way to the roof of the operations building, a quiet place above the noise. Below her, The outpost lights blinked in faint orange patterns across the valley floor. The smell of diesel and dust mixed with the faint metallic tang of spent brass. She sat beside her rifle case, unlatching it slowly. The Mk-13 Mod 7 rested inside, polished but not pristine, a weapon meant to be used, not admired. Her father's voice came back to her as she assembled the rifle, steady, deliberate, full of warmth that discipline never quite drowned out. Patience, Thea. You don't rush the wind, you read it. You feel it before it changes. She smiled faintly. He used to say the best snipers weren't killers. They were poets writing with the smallest ink possible, a single bullet, one heartbeat apart from silence. Thea ran her hand over the bolt, checking the tension. The engraved serial number caught the faint light, her only keepsake from before. From her chest pocket she pulled out a small challenge coin, worn smooth with age. The seal trident on one side and on the other, words she could still hear in his voice. Actions, not words. That coin had been her father's. Master Chief Francis Reigns, the man who trained half the snipers in naval special warfare. The man whose journals she'd studied after his death, learning every pattern of wind, every philosophy of patience. The man whose legacy she'd run from and inevitably returned to. 9 years of silence had followed his passing. 9 years of hiding behind her mother's maiden name so she could stand on her own. Now, in the same mountains where he once fought, she was about to carry that silence into battle. And yet, as the stars sharpened overhead, doubt crept in like frost. They didn't trust her. Maybe they never would. Maybe she'd made a mistake. You wanted to prove yourself, didn't you? She thought. You wanted to earn it without the shadow of his name. But reputation had power in this world. Sometimes the difference between a clean order and a hesitation that cost lives. She closed her eyes, remembering the last time she'd seen her father alive. The sterile scent of hospital rooms, the faint hum of oxygen machines. He'd been smaller then, thinner, but his eyes were still sharp as ever. The moment you need to tell them who you are, he'd said, is the moment you've already lost. She nodded, fighting back tears. Let the rifle speak. Now alone on that rooftop, she held that advice like scripture. The wind shifted slightly, brushing against her cheek. She looked through her scope, scanning the valley in near darkness. Somewhere beyond those ridges, the man named Manser slept under the same stars, unaware that tomorrow, the daughter of the sniper who'd once hunted men like him was already watching the wind. She adjusted the elevation dial by instinct. Windage, 2.3 mils left, just like her father's notes had said. The memory of his journal flashed in her mind, faded ink, scribbled equations, soft reflections written between missions. Excellence needs no announcement. That single line had changed her life. And tomorrow it might save others. The next morning began, long before dawn. The briefing tent glowed dimly under red light. Operators moved with quiet purpose, checking weapons, tightening straps, loading ammunition. Thea sat off to the side again, assembling her gear in silence. Williams approached, dropping his rucksack beside her. You good? He asked. She looked up, always. He nodded once, expression unreadable. They'll come around after today. She didn't answer. Words were unnecessary. At 200, two MH-47 Chinooks roared through the darkness, rotors slicing the cold air. Inside the dim cabin, Thea sat between packs of explosives and rangers gripping their rifles tight. Her eyes stayed fixed on the faint glow of her scope, cradled in her lap like something sacred. No one spoke to her, but that was fine. Silence had always been her ally. The descent came fast. The green light flashed, ropes dropped, and they were on the ground, just shadows in the dust. Thea moved with precision, following Williams toward their overwatch point, a rocky ridge overlooking Manser's compound 12 kilometers north. Every step, every breath was calculated. At 1,250 meters out, they set up. She unfolded the bipod, settled prone, and peered through her scope. The valley stretched wide before her, black shapes moving where sentries walked. The faint hum of a radio crackled in her ear, Brooks' voice cutting through. Ghost 4, this is actual. We're on approach. You are eyes on. Confirm overwatch position. Thea replied calmly. Overwatch set. Wind steady 5 knots west face. Copy. Then silence again. Williams spotted something through his spotting scope, a flicker of movement just beyond a cluster of rocks. Got a glint, he whispered. Might be optics. Thea adjusted focus. There, faint, subtle, almost invisible to the naked eye, the shimmer of a counter-sniper scope catching the dawn's first light. She checked her rangefinder. 1,130 meters. Brooks' voice came again. Ghost 4, we're moving in 3 minutes. Can you neutralize the counter-sniper? Her heart slowed, not sped up. The wind was wrong, too unstable. Negative, Martinez cut in over the net. That's beyond effective range in shifting air. Call for fire support. Thea didn't answer. She knew this terrain not from maps but from her father's handwriting. That same ridge, that same valley, the same early sun. Her father had once written. West face 6:30. Thermal rise 2.3 mil correction. 12-minute window. She whispered under her breath, 12 minutes. The timing wasn't right yet, but when it was, she could end this. Why was her heartbeat so calm when everyone else's was racing? Thea lay prone against the cold rock, her cheek pressed to the rifle's stock. The world through her scope wasn't noise and chaos anymore. It was math, motion, and instinct. Her pulse didn't speed up. It slowed, matching the rhythm she'd learned from her father's lessons long before she ever wore a uniform. In the soft haze before dawn, the mountains seemed to breathe. Wind whispered across the ridge line, carrying dust and faint echoes of rotor wash long faded into memory. She could almost feel the earth tilt beneath her, that delicate pull of the world she'd learned to read through glass and breath. Williams beside her was tense, his knuckles white against the spotting scope. Counter-sniper still glassing the valley, he muttered. Angle's bad, he's got eyes on the southern ingress. Thea adjusted her focus. The figure was barely visible, a dark silhouette nested within shadows. A professional, patient, trained. Brooks' voice came through comms, calm but clipped. Ghost 4 status. She replied evenly, visual on hostile marksman. Range 1130 meters. Wind variable, left to right, 8 knots gusting to 12. There was a pause. Can you make that shot? She didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, not yet. She looked toward the eastern ridge. The faintest pink brushed the horizon, light creeping like a secret. The same light her father had written about in the margins of his old journal. Wind change, 6:30, thermal rise predictable, window 12 minutes. Her father had logged it after his 3rd deployment to this very valley. 20 years earlier, these mountains had already learned his name. Now they would learn hers. She glanced at her watch, 6:23. 7 minutes. But Brooks and his assault team couldn't wait that long. Ghost 4, Martinez's voice came through, impatient, skeptical. We're not holding. We move in 2 mics. We need that overwatch clear. Thea's eyes stayed on the shimmer of the counter-sniper's lens. Her thumb rubbed against the worn coin in her pocket, the one engraved with her father's words, actions, not words. She whispered to herself, patience, Thea, wait for the wind to speak first. She had no intention of missing. When the moment came, it had to be perfect. She rolled slightly to her right, scanning the valley with binoculars. Movement faint but there. 2 sentries packing near a half-collapsed wall. A 3rd figure crouched behind a berm, scanning with binoculars of his own. Manser's security detail was wide awake. They weren't careless fighters. They were trained, disciplined, and deadly. Williams watched her work in silence. He wasn't sure yet whether he trusted her or just didn't want to interrupt her focus. Either way, he followed her adjustments carefully, logging wind readings and distances. He'd seen good shooters before, precise, composed, but there was something different about her. She wasn't calculating shots. She was listening to them. "Thea," he said quietly, "you ever—" "Don't talk," she interrupted softly. "Not yet." He fell silent, eyes back on his spotting scope. The horizon brightened. Shadows began to pull back from the valley. And then, right on schedule, it happened. The dust devils shifted. The leaves on the lone acacia below began to flicker in a pattern she knew by heart. The thermal rise. The valley exhaled. Her breathing slowed. "Windows open," she whispered. "Copy," Williams murmured, aligning his sight. "Target wind correction 2.3 mils left, thermal layer rising." Thea's finger rested lightly against the trigger. Her breathing was shallow, controlled, her heartbeat barely audible in her own ears. She watched the counter-sniper adjust his position, scanning for the approaching SEALs. She exhaled, the air leaving her lungs in a slow whisper. The rifle cracked. A single, flat sound rolled across the valley, swallowed by distance before echoing back like thunder. Williams caught it through the scope, the impact center mass, perfect alignment. Impact, target down. Thea had already cycled the bolt. Next. A second target, the berm fighter, turned sharply toward the sound. She didn't hesitate, adjusted for drift, squeezed. The round hit clean. 2 down. The third man moved, sprinting to cover, rifle raised. She tracked him through her scope. Her breathing stopped for a heartbeat. Another shot, another impact. 3. And then the fourth. A sentry emerging from behind the wall, raising his radio. He never finished his call. 4. 12 seconds, 4 shots, 4 kills. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder away, before anyone else even realized what had happened. Williams let out a long, low breath. Jesus, ghost. But she wasn't done. Through her scope she saw it, a flicker of movement in the upper window of the compound. A man lifting a launcher, heavy and slow. The shape unmistakable even through glare. An RPG. Brooks' team was 80 meters from the door. "Target high window," she called. "RPG operator." Williams adjusted frantically. "Range 1190, wind shift right, 3 mils hold." Her rifle steadied. The world narrowed to one image, the man's shoulder, the faint gleam of the launcher tube. She didn't breathe. Didn't blink. The rifle spoke again. The round struck just below the collarbone, spinning the target backward. The launcher fell, clattering uselessly inside the compound. Williams exhaled hard. Direct hit. Below them the assault team breached, controlled chaos, flashbangs shouting gunfire, then silence. Brooks' voice came through the net, low and calm. "Objective secure. 0 friendly casualties. Excellent work, Ghost 4. Thea said nothing. She just lifted her head slightly, watching the smoke rise from the compound. The rifle's barrel shimmered with heat, a faint whisper of metal and fire. Williams looked over at her. "How the hell did you know the wind would change like that?" She reached into her pocket, thumb brushing the worn surface of the coin again. "My father taught me." Williams frowned. "He Navy." She nodded once. "Yeah, he was." He didn't press further. There was something final in her tone, something that didn't invite curiosity. Back at the outpost, the mood was different. Operators who hadn't said a word to her the day before were now whispering quietly when she passed. No jokes this time, no sarcasm, just curiosity and something close to respect. Thea sat on the tailgate of a Humvee, cleaning her rifle in silence. Each piece methodical, bolt, barrel, scope, a ritual that grounded her more than any praise could. Martinez approached first. He wasn't smiling, but his tone was softer. "That was one hell of a morning," he said. "5 targets, one of 'em a counter-sniper. You saved our asses." Thea looked up briefly, then went back to wiping the bolt. "Just doing my job, Chief." He hesitated, then asked the question he'd been holding back since dawn. "Where'd you learn wind like that? That's something else." Her answer was quiet. "Long story." He chuckled. "Got time?" She shook her head. "You wouldn't believe it." He studied her face a moment longer, searching for something: pride, arrogance, even a smirk. He found none, only calm detachment. That calm unsettled him more than anything. Later that night, when most of the base slept, Thea sat alone again, this time in the dark corner of the operations room. The flicker of an old projector painted the walls with footage from a drone feed, the mission replaying in grainy thermal. Her shots appeared as sudden flashes of light, precise, almost inhumanly so. Brooks entered quietly, couldn't sleep. "Just reviewing." He stood beside her, watching the footage. "You could have waited for fire support. You didn't." She kept her eyes on the screen. "There wasn't time." "You risked your position, crawled 40 meters under open sky." She didn't answer. Brooks turned toward her. "Where did you learn to read the wind like that?" For a long time, she said nothing. Finally, she looked up, eyes steady. "My father taught me." "Name?" She hesitated. For 9 years, she'd avoided saying it. Every assignment, every deployment, every mission. Her father's shadow had followed her quietly, and she'd spent her career trying to prove she wasn't living in it. But tonight, surrounded by the same mountains that had once carried his legend, the silence felt unnecessary. "Master Chief Francis Reigns." Brooks' expression shifted, disbelief first, then recognition. He stepped back slightly. "Reigns, the one who—" "Yes." Thea stood, the faintest hint of weariness in her voice. "He trained half the men in this command. He wrote the wind formula manual you still use in sniper school." Brooks let out a quiet breath. "You're his daughter." She nodded. "But I wanted to earn my place without his name." He studied her a long time before answering. "You did." Outside, the wind swept across the valley again, whispering through the wire and canvas like an old echo. Thea looked toward the horizon, the same ridges her father once watched, the same silence that had always followed his shots. Now it followed hers. For the first time since he died, she didn't feel like she was standing in his shadow. She felt like she'd finally stepped beside it. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? 2 days after the mission, Combat Outpost Keating was almost too quiet. The usual sounds, rotor blades, laughter from the mess, the distant thud of mortars, had faded into a kind of respectful hush. The men weren't sure what to say around her now. Thea Reigns, though most still called her Cater, had become something between myth and mystery. 4 shots, 12 seconds, no misses. 5 threats neutralized, including a counter-sniper that had cost other teams blood. It wasn't just skill, it was impossible precision under impossible pressure. And she had done it without hesitation. But she hadn't done it for glory. Inside her quarters, a narrow room carved out of an old storage container, she sat on the lower bunk, cleaning her rifle again. Each piece moved through her hands like prayer beads. Williams leaned in the doorway. "You're gonna wear that barrel down at this rate." She didn't look up. "It's not about cleaning, it's about remembering." "Remembering what?" "That it's not a trophy." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You're the strangest sniper I've ever met." She glanced up, expression unreadable. "That's good. Normal snipers get killed." He chuckled once, then sobered. "You heard. Command wants a debrief tomorrow. The Admiral himself's flying in from Bagram." "I heard." "They're talking medals, Thea. Commendations, maybe even a silver star." She didn't react. "You're not happy about that?" he asked. Her voice stayed low. Metals rust, reputations fade, my father taught me that. Williams frowned. You never really talk about him. She hesitated, then set the bolt aside and looked at the wall, blank, unpainted metal, but in her mind she saw the rifle range back home. The smell of gun oil, the sound of waves hitting San Diego cliffs. He believed a sniper's job was to prevent chaos, not create it, she said quietly. He said the world doesn't need more noise, it needs fewer mistakes. Williams studied her a moment. He sounds like a good man. He was, she whispered, and I failed him for a long time. How? By hiding. The admission came softly, like she hadn't meant to say it aloud. That night a cold wind swept through the valley. Thea climbed the narrow ladder to the rooftop again. Below her, the outpost lights blinked like fragile stars. She pulled her jacket tighter, sitting cross-legged with her father's coin between her palms. Actions, not words. She turned it over slowly. The words had always been her anchor, but now they cut both ways. Because what did actions mean when her actions had become headlines inside military channels? When anonymous reports were already circulating through command networks about the female ghost sniper who'd saved an entire SEAL team. She hadn't wanted this. Recognition was noise. Noise was distraction. And distraction was death. She closed her eyes, remembering her father's study. The journals filled with notes written in the steady block letters of a man who never wasted ink. The rifle speaks once. The world listens. A wise shooter lets the echo fade before firing again. She hadn't let the echo fade yet. The next morning, the base stirred early. 2 helicopters landed just after sunrise, kicking up spirals of dust that rolled over the tents and HESCO barriers. The admiral arrived with a small entourage of staff officers, their uniforms too clean for the valley's grit. When Thea entered the operations tent for the debrief, conversation died instantly. Brooks stood beside the map display, his face unreadable. At ease, he said, but no one moved. The admiral gestured for her to sit. Petty officer, he began, flipping through a folder. Your performance during Operation Iron Gate exceeded every metric. Naval Special Warfare tracks. 5 confirmed kills. No friendly casualties. You identified a counter-sniper position, no drone or satellite intel detected. She stayed silent. He looked up. You understand that what you did saved lives, correct? Yes, sir. Then help me understand something. He leaned forward slightly. Why does your record before this mission look like a ghost file? You've operated on multiple deployments, but no commendations, no public citations, no mention of lineage. Her voice was calm. Because I didn't need them, sir. The admiral exchanged a glance with Brooks, half amused, half curious. You're not interested in promotion, recognition? No, sir. Then what are you interested in? Thea looked him in the eye. Precision, discipline, patience. Brooks almost smiled. The admiral didn't. He closed the folder slowly. Your father used to say that exact thing. Her breath caught just slightly. The admiral continued, softer now. Francis Rains was the best sniper this command ever trained. I served under him in Iraq. Didn't realize until yesterday who you were. She said nothing. He nodded once, then leaned back. You've honored him, whether you wanted to or not. She lowered her gaze. He tell you I've got a long way to go. Maybe, but I think he'd be proud. The words hit harder than he could have known. Pride, that was the one emotion her father had never expressed out loud. He'd shown it through patience, through silence, through teaching her how to breathe between wind gusts. Now, hearing it from someone else made her chest ache. The admiral closed the meeting with formality. Command's putting you in for the Silver Star. That's not optional. Yes, sir. When he left, Brooks lingered. You handled that well, he said quietly. She gave a faint smile. He's not wrong about one thing. What's that? Silence says more than speeches ever could. By evening, the rumor mill had reached every corner of the base. The ghost's real name is Reigns. She's the daughter of that Reigns. She outshot her own father's record. Thea ignored it all. She sat again on the firing range behind the outpost, taking slow, measured shots at steel plates 1,000 meters away. Not for training, for peace. Each impact rang like a heartbeat through the mountain air. Williams joined her after a while, sitting a few meters away. He didn't interrupt. He just watched as she reloaded, fired, adjusted, fired again. Finally, he said quietly, "You know, people back home are gonna want to know your story. They'll call you the first of something, the first woman to do this or that." She ejected the magazine, checking the chamber. "That's fine. You don't care. I care about being the last person someone sees before their team gets home safe. That's enough." He smiled faintly. "Your dad really trained you like this since you were a kid." "Every morning before school," she said, tone almost nostalgic. "One shot, cold barrel, no excuses." He shook his head in disbelief. "Most kids got told to make their beds." "He told me to read the wind." There was a quiet moment between them, the kind that only exists between people who have shared silence before danger. That night she dreamed. She was back on the range in Virginia Beach, 15 years old, the smell of rain thick in the air. Her father stood behind her, hands clasped, eyes soft but sharp. "Don't chase the target," he said. "Wait for it to come to you. The wind will bring it if you listen." In the dream, she turned, but he was already fatting. She woke to the sound of distant gunfire and helicopter blades, heart pounding. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then the metal ceiling above her came into focus. Afghanistan, the outpost, the war that never ended, just changed names. She sat up, running a hand through her hair, and felt something inside her shift. Legacy wasn't a shadow, it was a torch. And she wasn't running from it anymore. The next morning, Brooks found her in the mess tent, coffee in hand, alone as always. "You're leaving tomorrow," he said. "Orders." "Transfer, Naval Special Warfare Center, instructor candidate." She blinked. "Instructor." He nodded. "You're being considered for sniper school staff, the first woman ever to hold that billet." She frowned slightly. "I didn't request that." "Didn't have to. Command requested you." She looked down at her coffee, swirling the dark liquid slowly. "They think because of who my father was, I'll fill the same role." "Maybe, but I think it's because of who you are." Thea didn't answer. Brooks leaned closer. "You earned this. Don't let your fear of being compared to him make you hide from what you've already proved." She met his gaze. "You really think I've proved anything?" He smiled faintly. "You proved that excellence doesn't need to shout, but when it finally speaks, everyone listens." Later that day, as she packed her gear, Martinez approached her for the first time without a trace of skepticism. "Hey," he said quietly, "I owe you something." She looked up. "You don't owe me." "Yeah, I do," he hesitated. "I said some things before the op, stupid things." "You were protecting your team, I get it." He shook his head. "No, I was protecting my ego." She smiled, the kind that barely lifted one corner of her mouth. "Egos are loud, precision's quiet." He laughed once under his breath. "That sounds like something your old man would say." She nodded. He probably did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass cartridge casing, the one she'd fired the morning of the mission. "Keep it. Reminder of what quiet can do." She accepted it without a word. Outside, the Chinooks waited, engines idling. Thea looked once more toward the mountains, the same ridges that had taken her father's breath, the same wind that had carried his final lessons. Now it carried hers. She climbed aboard the helicopter, the coin still in her hand. The engines roared, drowning everything but thought. Through the open ramp, the valley stretched below like a memory. Somewhere between the roar of the blades and the silence of her heart, she heard her father's voice again. Excellence needs no announcement. She closed her eyes, whispering the reply she'd never said aloud. I know, Dad, but sometimes silence needs to be heard. Why did returning home feel more foreign than the war she'd just left behind? Thea stood at the edge of the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound in Coronado, California, the same grounds her father had once commanded. The Pacific wind carried salt and memory, whispering across the rifle range where generations of snipers had learned to breathe between heartbeats. Her orders had arrived sealed and short: report for instructor evaluation, sniper division, effective immediately. 9 words that felt heavier than any deployment briefing she'd ever read. The Navy had sent her here to teach, to pass on precision, to shape the next generation of shooters. But as she watched a line of trainees miss target after target in the morning fog, she wondered if she still had anything left to teach. She walked across the range, the sound of her boots crunching gravel beneath her. A few of the young candidates turned their heads, whispering. They knew who she was, or rather, they knew what she'd done. The story had spread faster than she ever wanted it to. The ghost sniper, the woman who'd hit 5 targets in 12 seconds. A myth, a record, a rumor. Not a person. Chief Instructor Wallace, a broad-shouldered veteran with gray at his temples, met her halfway down the firing line. His voice was polite but cold. Petty Officer Reigns. She nodded. Sir. Didn't think I'd see that name here again. His tone wasn't admiration, it was memory. He'd trained under her father 2 decades earlier. He'd learned the wind formulas, the breathing patterns, the patient stillness that Francis Rains had made legendary. Now, he looked at Thea like a ghost had come back to finish the lesson. I'm not him, she said quietly. Wallace gave a humorless smile. No, but you're carrying his shadow whether you like it or not. She met his gaze. I'm not here for shadows, I'm here for shooters. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Fine, let's see what you can do. The first week was harder than combat. Not because of the heat or the long hours on the range, but because of the stares, the whispers. Thea could feel them before she heard them. She's Rain's kid. She's here because of her name. No one shoots that perfect, must have been luck. She ignored it all. When she wasn't demonstrating wind calls or trigger discipline, she spent hours alone at dusk, recalibrating the range's weather vanes and adjusting the old spotting charts her father had once designed. The other instructors noticed, Wallace most of all. He watched her teach, calm, measured, never raising her voice. When a trainee missed, she didn't scold. She asked questions. What did you feel in your hands when you missed? What did the wind sound like? The recruits didn't understand at first. They were used to volume, to orders barked across the field, not to a sniper who spoke in whispers and pauses. But slowly the misses lessened, and the silence on the line began to change. It became focus. One evening, Wallace found her sitting alone on the observation deck overlooking the range. The sun bled gold across the water, painting the horizon in the same tones of dust and memory she'd left behind in Afghanistan. You've got their attention, he said, sitting beside her. That's not easy. She shrugged slightly. They just needed someone to listen before they pulled the trigger. He glanced sideways at her. You sound like your father. She didn't look away from the horizon. Everyone keeps saying that. Does it bother you? She was quiet a long moment. Then, it used to. Not anymore. No, I used to think being his daughter meant I had to live up to him. Now, I think it just means I have to live. Wallace nodded slowly. You know, he used to tell us that patience was the only real test of courage. I know. I think you've passed it. She gave a faint smile. Not yet. Thea's reputation grew in quiet ways. Recruits started quoting her without realizing it. Feel the wind before you measure it. Don't chase your target, let it come to you. Stillness isn't weakness, it's control. One afternoon, she caught Martinez walking across the range, now wearing an instructor patch himself. He grinned when he saw her, heard the legend herself was back stateside, thought I'd see it for myself. She stood brushing dust from her knees. Didn't expect to see you here. I requested it, he said simply. Wanted to learn from you this time. She raised an eyebrow. After all that talk in Afghanistan. He laughed. Hey, you converted me, one clean shot at a time. She smirked, then turned back toward the firing line. Good, because I'm not teaching names here. I'm teaching silence. Silence. She nodded, the hardest weapon to master. As weeks passed, the base's rhythm became familiar again. The crack of rifles, the smell of burnt powder, the low hum of ocean wind cutting across the sand dunes. But at night, when the range was empty, Thea still visited the small memorial by the flagpole, the one dedicated to fallen instructors. Her father's name sat near the top, etched deep in brass. Francis M. Reigns, Master Chief, Mentor, Warrior, Father. She traced her fingertips over the engraved letters, then placed her coin beneath it, just for a moment. It wasn't a prayer, it was acknowledgement. Still watching, she whispered. Good, because I'm finally listening. The moon hung low above the ocean. The waves whispered back something that sounded like peace. The next morning, Wallace gathered the instructors for evaluation. We've been asked to review Reigns for permanent staff appointment, he announced. The room fell quiet. One instructor spoke up. Sir, with respect, we're talking about the sniper who. Wallace cut him off. We're talking about a teacher now, not a shooter. He turned to Thea. Show them what you teach. Thea nodded, stepped forward, and began without notes. When I joined the Navy, I thought precision meant control, she said softly. That if you could control everything, wind, breath, distance, you could own the outcome. She paused, letting the room breathe. But control isn't power. Control is fear in disguise. Real power is trust, trust in your training, your spotter, your instincts, and your stillness. She picked up a rifle from the rack, holding it carefully. My father used to say a rifle's not a weapon, it's a mirror. Whatever's inside you, fear, pride, anger, the rifle will reflect it, and you'll miss. Her gaze drifted across the room. You don't need to be loud to lead. You don't need to be first to be strong. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Silence followed. Not empty, not uncomfortable. Just quiet, the kind that fills a room when truth has landed. Wallace's voice was soft. That's enough. He dismissed the others, then turned back to her. Congratulations, Instructor Reigns. For the first time in years, she let herself smile fully. Not the tight, polite version, but something real, something free. That night, as the sun sank behind the range, she stood alone again at the edge of the water. The Pacific smelled different than Afghanistan, softer, cleaner, but the wind still spoke the same language. She closed her eyes, letting it brush against her face. You were right, Dad, she murmured. The space between heartbeats holds more power than any ammunition. She paused, but I think I finally understand what you meant. You weren't talking about shooting. You were talking about living. A long breath left her chest, carrying the last trace of the shadow she'd been chasing. Behind her, distant shots echoed from the range, trainees learning the art of stillness, guided by her lessons. Each crack carried her father's philosophy forward, reborn, reshaped, retaught. And Thea realized that maybe legacy wasn't about being remembered. Maybe it was about leaving behind silence that others could fill with meaning. As darkness settled, she picked up her coin one last time, running her thumb over the faded words. Actions, not words. She smiled. I think I finally got it. Then, slipping the coin back into her pocket, she turned away from the ocean, walking toward the glow of the range lights, toward a future no longer defined by shadows, but by the quiet strength of her own making. Why did he remind her so much of herself? Thea watched the new recruit line up his shot, sloppy posture, too much tension in the shoulders, eyes darting between scope and target like he was afraid of missing more than he wanted to hit. Breathe, she said calmly. He fired anyway. The round went wide, dust kicking up 2 meters off target. She exhaled through her nose. That wasn't breathing. The trainee petty officer second class Ryan Hale lowered his rifle and turned, frustration carved across his face. With respect, ma'am, I've been shooting since I was 12. I know how to breathe. Thea folded her arms. You know how to inhale and exhale. You don't know how to listen to the breath. He frowned. There's a difference. Between hitting a target and saving a life, yeah. The line of trainees snickered softly. Hale flushed, jaw tight. Try again, she said. He reset, gripping the rifle like he wanted to choke it. Thea crouched beside him, voice softer now. You're fighting it. The rifle doesn't need your strength, it needs your patience. He looked through the scope again, this time slower. The wind flags on the range whispered and shifted small clues he wasn't seeing. Feel it, she said quietly. Don't calculate it yet, just feel it. The rifle cracked. Steel sang from 1,000 meters away. Hale blinked, almost in disbelief. Thea nodded once. Now you're breathing. By the end of that week, Hale had gone from loud to quiet, from cocky to curious. He started arriving early, asking questions she wasn't used to hearing. Not about medals or records, but about philosophy. Why do you keep saying patience is a weapon? He asked one afternoon as they cleaned rifles side by side. Thea glanced up. Because it is. He frowned. I thought accuracy was. Accuracy without patience is luck. Patience without ego is mastery. He nodded slowly, letting that sink in. Then, hesitantly, is that something your father taught you? The question hit softer than she expected, but it still hit. She smiled faintly. Yeah, he believed stillness could speak louder than orders. Hale grinned. Doesn't sound like most instructors. He wasn't most instructors. Her eyes drifted to the range horizon, the same ocean wind her father had once trained in. And he didn't believe in loud students either. Hale smirked. So I'm doomed. She gave him a sideways glance. Only if you keep talking. Weeks passed. The trainees improved under her quiet guidance, but Hale stood out, raw, unpredictable, gifted. He was what her father would have called dangerous potential. During one late session, she noticed him adjusting his scope for a crosswind that didn't exist. Hold your fire, she called. He froze. What did the wind tell you? She asked. He hesitated. It felt like it was picking up. Felt or feared? He blinked. What? Did you feel it, or were you afraid of missing again? He looked down at the rifle. Maybe both. She nodded. Then trust neither. Wait for what's true. He exhaled slowly, waited. The air stilled. When he fired again, the round hit dead center. She smiled faintly. That's truth. But not everyone on base was thrilled about her methods. A week later, she was called into Wallace's office. He sat behind his desk, expression unreadable. Reigns, he said, tapping a pen against a file. You're rewriting the curriculum out there. She stayed standing. No, sir, I'm refining it. Semantics, he leaned back. You've got students meditating on the range. You've got others talking about listening to wind like it's a religion. She didn't flinch. They're learning discipline, not ego. He sighed. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying command's getting curious. They want results on paper, not poetry. She met his eyes. Then they'll get both. Wallace studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. You've got one evaluation left, the final exercise. Show them you're not just a name. The final test came 2 days later, a simulated Overwatch mission across a rugged stretch of desert east of the base. Pairs of trainees would set up observation posts, track mock targets, and record hits under timed pressure. It wasn't about killing, it was about composure. Thea paired with Hale as spotter and shooter, not because of favoritism, because she needed to know if he could trust silence. They moved out at dawn, crossing dunes that shimmered under a rising sun. Heat waves distorted the horizon, turning every shape into a mirage. By midday, they'd found a small rise overlooking the valley below. Hale sat up, breathing steady but his hands trembling slightly. "You nervous?" she asked. "Always," he admitted. "Means I care." "Good," she said. "Now make sure the nerves don't care back." He chuckled once, then peered through his scope. 2 targets southeast ridge. She adjusted her binoculars. "Copy. Watch for wind shear at 8 o'clock. Mirage says it's pulling low left." He made the correction, waited. Then crack. Target 1 down. He cycled the bolt, second shot ready. But then something changed. The wind shifted suddenly, a desert gust rolling up from the valley floor. Thea saw it before he did. Hold. Too late. The shot went wide. Dust exploded 10 meters off target. Hale swore, slamming the bolt. She put a hand on the rifle barrel, not scolding, not angry, just firm. "Breathe." He exhaled hard. "I had it lined up." "You rushed the wind." He looked through the scope again, teeth clenched. "I didn't want to miss." She crouched beside him. "Missing doesn't make you weak, rushing does." He didn't respond. They stayed there for a long time, both watching the horizon. The desert heat shimmered like glass. Finally Hale spoke, voice quieter. "You ever rush?" She hesitated, eyes distant. "Once." He turned to her. "In combat?" She nodded slowly. "First deployment. I took a shot I shouldn't have. It saved the mission, but it cost someone their trust." "Your co?" "Myself." The silence stretched between them, not awkward, just heavy. Then softly she added, "Patience isn't about waiting. It's about believing you'll still be enough when the moment finally comes." Hale's expression shifted, not understanding, but something close. He nodded once, "Okay." When the next wind cycle came, he waited, counted heartbeats, trusted the stillness. Then one clean shot, impact confirmed. He didn't smile, he just exhaled and said, "Now I get it." Thea smiled faintly. "Good, don't forget it." Back at base, Wallace reviewed the after-action report. "Flawless finish," he said, glancing up. "He's good." "He's patient," Thea corrected. "Same thing, isn't it?" She shook her head. "Not even close." He chuckled. "You sound more like your father every day." She looked at him, tone soft but firm. "No, I sound like someone who finally understands him." That evening, Hale found her sitting on the seawall, the sun sinking behind her. He hesitated before approaching. "Ma'am." She looked up. "You passed. You don't have to call me ma'am anymore." He smiled awkwardly. "Habit." He sat beside her, silence settling between them. The tide rolled in slow waves below. "Thank you," he said finally, "for not giving up on me." She shook her head. "You did the hard part." He grinned. "You mean listening?" "That, and shutting up long enough to learn something." He laughed quietly, then grew serious. "You ever think about going back out there, combat?" She gazed at the horizon. "Sometimes, but maybe my fight's not out there anymore." He nodded, thoughtful. "You think your dad would say the same?" She smiled faintly. "He'd probably say, 'You finally stopped running.'" "From what?" "From silence." When Hale left to join his first team, he handed her a small brass casing from the final exercise. "For luck," he said, "or for memory." She took it gently. They're the same thing. As he walked away, she realized something her father had probably known all along, that teaching wasn't about creating versions of yourself. It was about creating echoes that learned to stand alone. That night she stood once more at the range, wind brushing across the sand. The lights flickered softly, the ocean murmuring beyond the dunes. She loaded one round, just one. A tradition she hadn't broken since childhood. Cold barrel, no warm-ups, one shot. She lined up the steel plate 1,000 meters away. The wind shifted, then calmed. She whispered, "You still watching, Dad?" Then steady and sure crack. The impact rang like a bell in the distance. She lowered the rifle, smiling quietly to herself. The echo faded, but peace remained. For the first time, it didn't feel like she was living her father's story. It felt like she was writing her own. Why did the call come the moment she finally felt at peace? Thea was mid-instruction when the command messenger found her. It was just after 900, bright morning sun cutting across the range, the Pacific air sharp with salt and gunpowder. Her class of new snipers had been working a long-distance drift test when the jeep rolled up. "Petty Officer Reigns," the driver said, stepping out, an envelope in his hand. "Priority orders from command." Wallace's brow furrowed as he walked over. "Orders." Thea wiped her hands, taking the sealed packet. "Who from?" "Admiral's office. Immediate response requested." She broke the seal with her thumb, eyes scanning the page. "Temporary deployment. Joint tasking under Special Operations Command. Theater, Horn of Africa. Objective, advisory and precision overwatch for extraction mission. Duration undisclosed." She folded the paper silently. Wallace exhaled through his nose. "They're pulling you back in." "Looks like it." He crossed his arms. "You don't owe them another field run, Thea. You've done more than enough." She looked toward the trainees adjusting their scopes, her students, her new beginning. "They're not calling the instructor," she said quietly. "They're calling the ghost." Wallace hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful. Ghosts have a habit of not coming home." She gave a faint smile. "I'll be fine. I know how to find my way back." 48 hours later, the world turned from blue horizon to desert haze. Djibouti heat hit like a wall as the transport ramp lowered. Thea stepped out in full field gear, rifle case in hand, sunglasses hiding the exhaustion in her eyes. A Marine major met her on the tarmac. "Petty Officer Reigns." "Yes, sir." "Glad you made it. You're embedded with a joint rescue task force. American aid workers captured near the Somali border. 2 hostages, possibly 3. Local insurgent group, well-armed, entrenched." "Intel?" "Unclear. We've got limited satellite coverage and sketchy drone feeds. They're asking for sniper overwatch, someone who knows how to read wind and chaos." She gave a single nod. "Then I guess I'm home." The forward operating base was little more than a cluster of tents and steel shipping containers. Heat shimmered off the sand as she met the small team. 6 operators, a medic, and 1 intelligence tech hunched over a flickering screen. The team leader, Captain Rayner, extended a hand. "You're the famous one, huh? The SEAL who taught the wind to behave." Thea shook his hand without smiling. "I don't teach wind, Captain. I listen to it." He grinned. "Even better, we'll need that." He pointed to a satellite image taped to a table. "Compound here. Hostages in this main building. Locals estimate 20 hostiles, possibly foreign trainers. We'll insert at night, approach from the wadi to the south." "Elevation?" she asked. 300 meters on the ridge west. Good overwatch, bad extraction route. You'll have a spotter." She looked up. "Who?" Rayner smirked. "Guess." Thea's stomach sank as a familiar voice came from behind her. "Miss me, ma'am." "Hale." He stood in full combat gear, grin as reckless as ever, but his eyes steadier, sharper. She exhaled slowly. "You shouldn't be here." Neither should you, he said with a smile. Guess we're both bad at retirement. Rayner looked between them. You two know each other. Thea nodded, instructor and student. Perfect, Rayner said. You'll be fine. She gave him a look that said otherwise. That night, the world shrank again to moonlight and mission prep. Hale checked his optics beside her. You really didn't think we'd meet again, did you? She didn't answer immediately. I hoped we wouldn't. Why? Because every time you see someone again in this line of work, it means the world's still burning. He nodded, sobering. Then let's try to put one fire out. Thea smirked faintly. You've grown up. He chuckled. You taught me patience. I've been waiting to prove it. She looked over the ridge map. Good, you'll need it. They moved out at 100. The desert was black and breathless, the stars sharp and endless above them. The only sound was boots crunching sand and the whisper of gear shifting in rhythm. At the overwatch point, Thea set up her rifle, her same Mk13 Mod 7, rebuilt, repainted, but still hers. She adjusted the bipod, then settled prone, the familiar piece of the scope returning like a heartbeat. Hale knelt beside her, spotting scope ready. Range 1150 meters to compound, winds erratic. She nodded, scanning the perimeter. Wait for the pattern. The desert breathes slower than the mountains. Below them, faint shadows moved, guards packing under floodlights, rifles slung loose. The hostages were inside a windowless building near the north wall. Thermal shows 2 heat signatures tied down in the main room, Hale murmured. Third possible in the corner. Copy. Minutes passed. The team began their approach from the south, ghosting through the wadi in silence. Then, without warning, headlights flared from the east, 2 pickup trucks, men shouting, gunfire cutting through the night. Ambush, Hale hissed. Thea's pulse didn't spike, it slowed. Find the machine gunner. Hale scanned fast, roof of the east building, RPK. She adjusted her scope, aligning through dust and darkness. Wind steady now, right to left, 6 knots. She exhaled. Crack. The gunner dropped before the second shout finished. Hit confirmed, Hale said. Next. Second one back of the truck. Crack. Another down. Below, the assault team sprinted through the breach, flashbangs and muffled bursts lighting the compound. Then chaos. One of the trucks exploded, fire rolling through the courtyard. The radio came alive with static and shouting. This is Raven Actual, taking contact north wall. Hale adjusted, 2 hostiles flanking the breach. Mark M, she said. Tagged. 2 more shots, clean and calm. Thea barely blinked between impacts. Each pull of the trigger was memory, precision without thought, instinct without ego. But something was wrong. Hale caught it first. Thermal shows movement west side of the compound, moving fast, looks like. He froze. What? She asked. Child small, can't be more than 12, running toward the breach. Thea looked through her scope, saw it too. A boy barefoot sprinting through smoke, carrying something clutched to his chest. Is that? Hale started. Explosive vest, she finished. The radio crackled. Actual to Ghost, we have movement. She didn't wait. Her finger hovered on the trigger, heart twisting. It wasn't a shot she'd ever wanted to take, not again. Her father's words echoed through the roar in her mind. The rifle speaks once, the world listens. But sometimes the world didn't deserve silence. Her voice broke. Target confirmed, 12 meters from team. Hale's whisper was barely a breath. Thea. She closed her eyes for 1 heartbeat, then she fired. The sound disappeared into the wind. When the smoke cleared, the boy was gone. So was the explosion that would have killed everyone inside. The radio stayed silent for a long moment. Then Brooks' voice, older now but unmistakable, came through from command. Ghost, we copy. Hostages secure. No casualties. Repeat, no casualties. Thea lowered her head, hands trembling against the rifle. Hale's voice was soft. You saved them. She shook her head slowly. I killed a child. You saved 12 lives, he said again. Maybe more. She stared at the horizon. Then why does it feel like I lost something? Back at the fob, silence followed her like a shadow. Debrief was short, clinical. Mission success. 0 friendly KIA. All hostages recovered. They didn't write down what it cost her. Hale found her later by the runway, sitting on a crate, the desert wind moving her hair gently across her face. The stars above were the same kind she'd looked at in Afghanistan, sharp, distant, judging. You did what you had to, he said quietly. She didn't look at him. That's what everyone says. They're right. She shook her head. There's no clean way to explain what happens to you after a shot like that. You can't justify it. You can only live with it. He sat beside her, silent. Finally, she spoke again. You remember what I taught you about patience? He nodded. That it's not waiting, it's believing you'll still be enough when the moment comes. She turned her head toward him. Tonight proved I still am, but I don't know if I want to be. The wind carried that thought away. Neither spoke again. When they flew home, no ceremony waited. No reporters, no medals. Just the quiet ocean breeze of Coronado. Wallace met her on the tarmac, saying nothing, only handing her a small box. Inside, her father's old challenge coin, the same one she'd left at the memorial. Found it on the range, he said. Figured you need it again. She turned it over in her hand, reading the worn inscription. Actions, not words. Her voice cracked. He'd hate what I had to do. Wallace shook his head. No, he'd hate that you had to feel it, but he'd understand. She looked toward the sunset, red bleeding into gold, the horizon endless. For the first time in years, she whispered to herself, almost too softly to hear. Excellence doesn't mean being perfect. It means standing still long enough to face what you've done. The coin caught the last light of day, glinting like an old promise, one she finally understood even if it hurt. Why was silence louder now than gunfire had ever been? Thea Reigns had come home, but the desert was still in her lungs. The heat, the smell of sand baked in blood, the echo of a single shot that had stopped a boy from running, none of it had stayed overseas. It followed her like a second shadow. Days at the Naval Special Warfare Center blurred together. She taught, she spoke, she breathed, but somewhere behind every sentence lived the sound of that shot. Her students didn't notice, her colleagues respected the distance, but Wallace did. He found her on the range one morning, sitting alone long after class had ended. Her rifle lay disassembled beside her, untouched. The wind was gentle, carrying the smell of ocean salt instead of desert dust. You're not cleaning it, he said quietly. She looked up. Not today. He stepped closer. You've been back 2 weeks. You haven't fired a single round. I don't trust myself to yet. He studied her. Because of Djibouti. She didn't answer. He lowered himself onto the bench beside her. You saved 12 people. She stared at her hands. I killed one. Someone who was already gone. She shook her head. That's an excuse, the kind people use so they can sleep. Wallace exhaled, rubbing a hand across his jaw. You want the truth. She nodded once. You're not supposed to sleep easy. None of us do, but you do keep moving. Her voice cracked. And what happens when moving feels like running away? He didn't answer. She picked up the rifle bolt, turning it slowly in her fingers. Her father's words whispered back, the same ones that had guided her every mission. Let the rifle speak. But what if the rifle had said too much? That night she couldn't sleep. Her quarters felt smaller than ever. The glow of the clock taunted her 02:37, 02:38, 02:39, each minute a reminder that her mind wouldn't rest. She sat up, lacing her boots, and walked outside. The range was empty, silver under the moonlight. She laid down prone, assembled the rifle piece by piece, and stared through the scope at a blank target 1,000 meters away. But she didn't fire. She just watched the crosshairs dance with the wind, the stillness between gusts mocking her. In the silence, she saw the boy again. Running. The flash. The moment when the world decided that her peace was less important than someone else's survival. A voice behind her broke the loop. Couldn't sleep either. She turned. Hale stood a few feet away, wearing civilian clothes, hair longer, eyes older. "You got reassigned fast," she said. He shrugged. "Rotated back last week. Heard you were keeping to yourself." "I'm fine." He tilted his head. "You sure about that?" She didn't answer. He sat down beside her, pulling his knees up. "You ever wonder why it's always the quiet ones that the noise follows home?" She smirked faintly. "Because we don't know how to outrun it." He nodded. "You did what no one else could that night. Doesn't mean you have to be proud of it. Just means you have to live with it." She looked back through her scope. "Living the hard part." "Yeah," he said softly. "But you taught me once that stillness isn't weakness. Maybe this is just another kind of stillness." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Thea lifted the rifle and fired one clean shot. The plate sang, clear and sharp. She lowered the rifle, blinking through the recoil. Hale smiled gently. "You're still you." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe I'm just what's left." Days turned to weeks. She resumed teaching, but differently. Thea didn't lecture about patience anymore. She showed it. She talked less about precision and more about the weight behind it, the invisible cost that never made it into manuals or briefings. Her students noticed. The room would fall silent when she spoke now, not from fear but from gravity. "Every shot leaves a fingerprint," she told them one morning. "Not just on your hands, on your mind. If you don't learn to carry it, it'll carry you." A recruit raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you not carry it?" She smiled sadly. "You don't, you just learn how to balance it." They didn't understand yet, but someday they would. Wallace called her into his office after class. He held a folded paper. "Command offering you a transfer, training division at Quantico, advisory role." She frowned. "You trying to get rid of me?" He chuckled. "No, I'm trying to see if you still know what you want." She looked at the paper. "Promotion, higher pay, fewer ghosts." She set it down. "No, sir." "Why?" "Because I'm still learning here." He smiled softly. "So was your father right up to the end." Her throat tightened. "He'd have hated seeing me like this." "I don't think so. He'd have said you finally understand the difference between precision and peace." She nodded, fighting the sting in her eyes. That night, Thea went to the memorial again. The same brass plaque glimmered faintly in the low light. Francis M. Reigns. She knelt, pulling the old coin from her pocket. "I did what you asked," she whispered. "I let the rifle speak, but now I need to learn how to be quiet again." She placed the coin beneath his name, then stood back. Behind her, the ocean wind carried the faintest echo of waves, soft, rhythmic, forgiving. And for the first time, she didn't feel haunted. She felt watched over. 2 days later, Hale approached her on the range. "I'm shipping out again," he said. "Different theater. They asked me to pick my own spotter." She looked at him carefully. "You want my blessing?" He shook his head. "I want your advice." She smiled faintly. "Then I'll give you what my father gave me, 3 rules." He listened closely. "First," she said, "never take a shot to prove who you are. Take it to protect who you love." He nodded. "Second, when the wind changes, don't fight it. Learn from it. Life works the same way." "And the third?" She looked toward the horizon. "When the silence after a mission feels too heavy, fill it with something good. something worth the noise. Hale grinned. Guess I've got homework then. Guess you do. They stood there a moment, wind tugging gently at their sleeves, the ocean glittering beyond the dunes. Hey, he said finally, for what it's worth, I think you found your balance. She looked down at her rifle, then back at him. No, but I stopped pretending I needed to. He smiled, saluted lightly, and walked off toward the hangars, another echo stepping into his own silence. That evening, she sat on the seawall again. The sun sank low, painting everything in gold and amber. She thought about her students, her father, the boy in the desert, and all the names that never made it onto plaques. She realized that peace wasn't something you reached. It was something you practiced, a daily truce between who you were and who you wished you'd been. She whispered into the wind, "Dad, I think I understand now." The waves replied, breaking softly against the rocks as if to say good. She smiled, "Then I'll keep teaching." The horizon blurred into twilight, the line between sea and sky fading into one vast calm. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't a sniper or an instructor or a legend's daughter. She was just Thea Reigns, someone learning how to live between heartbeats. Why do endings always sound like echoes? Thea Reigns stood at the edge of the firing range at dawn, the same range where everything had begun, and, in a way, where it all had ended. The Pacific wind moved softly through the dunes, carrying that faint scent of salt, steel, and gun oil. The sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon, but the sky was already bruised with gold. She wasn't holding a rifle. Not today. Instead, her hands rested on the worn railing of the observation deck, fingers brushing against grooves carved by generations before her. In the distance, she could hear the pop of gunfire, new trainees working through their final tests, their voices low, their movements measured. She watched them the way her father must have once watched her, with quiet pride and unspoken prayer. Inside the main building, a wall of photographs lined the corridor, black and white faces, sepia smiles, medals beneath frames. At the far end, someone had added a new display. A shadow box. Inside, one brass casing, one coin, and a single line etched on the plaque beneath it. Excellence speaks in whispers until the moment demands a roar. In honor of Master Chief Francis Reigns and Petty Officer Thea Reigns. She had protested when Wallace first suggested adding her name. But he'd said something she couldn't argue with. You taught others to be silent, Thea, but silence means nothing if it leaves no echo. So she agreed, not because she needed to be remembered, but because her father's philosophy deserved to keep breathing. Thea's daily routine had become simple: mornings on the range, afternoons mentoring instructors, evenings by the sea. It wasn't retirement, it was rhythm, something steady after years of recoil. She rarely spoke about Djibouti anymore, or the ambush in Afghanistan, or the long nights when her breath and heartbeat had been the only sound for miles. She didn't need to. The lessons lived in her students' eyes. One afternoon, a new trainee approached her, a woman, barely 20, with the kind of defiance Thea used to mistake for strength. "Ma'am," she said nervously, "they told me you don't miss." Thea smiled faintly. "They told you wrong." The recruit frowned. "But your record?" "My record is a list of mistakes I learned to live with." The girl hesitated. "Then how do you become like you?" Thea thought about it for a moment. Then she said softly, "By realizing that shooting straight has nothing to do with your aim." The recruit blinked. "I don't understand." "You will," Thea said, smiling gently, "after your first miss." That night Thea sat on the seawall again, the ocean stretching infinite before her. The sound of waves rolled in like memory, steady, unchanging. She closed her eyes and remembered a day long ago, a little girl standing behind her father, the world still innocent, the rifle too big for her hands. He said, "One shot, cold barrel, no excuses." Back then she thought he meant skill. Now she understood he meant character. It wasn't about pulling the trigger. It was about when not to. She whispered into the wind, "You'd like this place now, Dad. They listen more than they talk." The wind answered by brushing her hair across her face, soft and warm like a ghost's hand. She smiled. Weeks turned into months. Thea's body healed from old battles, but her mind learned something harder: gentleness. One afternoon, she watched Hale walk down the runway with his own students. His posture had changed, calm, grounded. When he saw her watching, he raised a hand in quiet acknowledgement. In him, she saw the continuation of everything her father had built, and everything she had rebuilt. The cycle was complete. Teacher, student, then teacher again. Later that day, Hale joined her by the range. "Got a surprise for you," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. She opened it. Inside, an official Navy letter. Recommendation for Civilian Marksmanship Instructor, Naval Special Warfare Heritage Division. She looked up. "You wrote this?" He shrugged. "You always said the quiet one should be heard when it matters. Maybe it's time the world outside these fences learned from you too." She shook her head. "I'm not sure the world's ready." He smiled. "Then start with the part that is." She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her jacket pocket. For once, the idea of change didn't scare her. That evening, the instructors gathered for a ceremony, small, quiet, unannounced. Wallace stood at the podium, reading a few words from an old notebook. "This command has always trained warriors," he said. "But sometimes we're lucky enough to train teachers. Thea Reigns reminded us that strength doesn't always shout, and that precision isn't about perfection, it's about purpose." He gestured toward her. "Most of you know her story, but what matters isn't the battles she fought, it's what she built after." Thea didn't like applause, so when it came, soft and genuine, she simply bowed her head, the faintest smile tugging her lips. Later, after the lights dimmed and everyone had drifted off toward the mess hall, she lingered alone by the podium. Her eyes landed on the last line of Wallace's notes, written in his steady hand. "Sometimes the quietest voices leave the loudest legacy." She folded the paper, slipped it into her pocket, and walked outside. The air was cool, the moon high. Thea made her way back to the range, her sanctuary. She set her rifle on the bench, checked the chamber, and loaded one round. Old habits die slowly. She took her position, prone, elbows firm, cheek against stock. Through the scope, the world was small again, clear, familiar, honest. The target stood 1,000 meters out, glinting faintly under the moonlight. The wind shifted, she felt it, listened. Not to calculate this time. To connect. In that moment, she wasn't a soldier. She wasn't even a sniper. She was a daughter, listening to the same wind her father once trusted. She smiled, steady hands finding balance. "Actions," she whispered, "not words." The rifle spoke. A single perfect sound. Clean, calm, complete. The impact echoed through the night, not sharp, but beautiful, like a final note played on an old instrument. And when it faded, there was peace. Months later, long after she'd left the base for good, a new generation of recruits gathered for their first day of sniper training. Hale stood before them, sunlight at his back. Behind him, on the wall, hung the quote every student would learn before they ever touched a rifle. "Patience is a weapon, stillness is strength, silence is truth." Thea Reigns. A young trainee raised his hand. "Sir, who was she?" Hale smiled faintly, looking toward the horizon. "She was the instructor who taught us that you don't need to be seen to make an impact." He paused, letting the wind brush across the field, the same rhythm she once taught him to feel. "And she was proof," he said quietly, "that excellence doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to act." That night, as dusk fell over Coronado, the wind carried the sound of distant gunfire across the range. One shot stood out soft, perfect, almost familiar. Maybe it was the ocean echoing. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the sound of Thea Reigns, reminding the world that silence, when earned, is the loudest sound of all. And somewhere beyond the horizon, in the space between two heartbeats, a whisper answered. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.